Welcome to Beyond The Bout, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the strip. I'm Mark Angelos, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Lefty Zlotnick, founder of Red Panda Fencing and the mind behind the Touch by Touch app. How are you, Lefty?
Good, Mark. Can't wait to meet our next guest.
Yeah, today's guest is someone who's not just building fencing's culture, but the future of fencing as well. Coach Mike Malecki is a longtime head coach of Morris Catholic Fencing. He's fresh off leading the girls' épée squad in a District 2 championship and an 8th place state finish in 2024. As I understand, also a history teacher, a referee, and someone who's been part of the program for a very long time. Mike has a lot of experience and expertise to share with us. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Love to get a little bit about your background, your origin. How'd you get involved with fencing? And tell us a bit about how you came to be where you are.
My roommate in college was a Society for Creative Anachronism fencer. And I'd always loved Star Wars. My dad watched Errol Flynn. I loved Zorro. And I'd always loved it, but I'd never heard of the sport until college. My roommate was like, let's go to an SCA thing. And I went, and there was no fencing. It was all the heavy combat that they were doing. And I'm not really into that. He wasn't really into that. So I said, all right, I'll take a fencing class because I'm in the physical education department at West Virginia. I was studying to be an athletic trainer at the time. And I turned around and said, yeah, I have to take 2 PE classes. Might as well take fencing. And then I learned how to be a fencing person. I joined the West Virginia University Fencing Club. And then I was with them for a little bit. And then I was also with the Society for Creative Anachronism. And I became a marshal of the fence. And I received an award of arms for martial combat in fencing. And that's what pretty much got me started on the journey of it. And as I finished my college with a history degree instead of an athletic training degree, I found that it's very hard to find history jobs that are not teaching. So I went back to get my teaching license, at which point I created the Seton Hill Fencing Club at Seton Hill University in Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
Mike, I'd love to get a bit about your coaching philosophy. You're not just coaching kids, you're teaching life skills if you think about it. So what do you hope that your athletes take away from what you teach them and how you coach?
My philosophy has always been that this is a sport about honor. It's a sport about integrity. So the first thing in all of my programs that I start off with is that you have to be honorable. You have to be straightforward. I tell my students to make sure you salute properly, that you look your opponent in their eyes and you honestly give them good wishes for the match. And you do the same at the end so that there's no hard feelings. I explain that's a tradition in most martial combat like karate and for boxing. And it's the purpose for that is that they should treat their opponents with respect, and they should treat their opponents with dignity if they lose or humbleness when they win. We are here to have fun. We are here to do things. And one of the reasons for the courtesy is the fact that you are putting somebody in danger by fencing. There is risk of injury, just like every other sport, a lot less in fencing, definitely. But I want to make sure that the kids have an honorable sense to them. And that is important to me. The other thing I try to make sure of is number one, that it is a team. I work in a club atmosphere and I work as a team coach. One of the biggest advantages of being a high school fencer is to be on a team and learn teamwork, learn how to lead each other in your squad or in your team, to learn how to build something of value. And that's something that if you ask any Morris Catholic, and I will add in Pope John as well, because we co-opt with them for the last 3-4 years, is everybody who's been on the team understands that we work together and that our actual cheer is Currahee, which is an old 101st Airborne saying, which means we stand alone together. So the kids will shout Currahee, and then they learn about standing together. So whenever Morris Catholic is on the field, you will know we're there, because you will hear us cheering for each other. You'll hear us backing each other up. Everybody is working hard and everybody is learning something new. A team should actually work together. And it's fun because my kids are in Div 1, Div 2, Div 3 fencing. And one of the things that I get from a lot of the coaches is that they like my kids because they're coachable. They can take another coach's advice and they can listen and they can use it when they need to.
I think that's something that this talk is really touching on, is we're not just talking about an athlete. They're student athletes, and they learn from Mike how to not just be that fencer, that athlete part, but they learn how to be a human being, and a decent one at that. And the whole sportsmanship philosophy that he has is deep rooted in every one of his fencers. When I coached at Morris Hills, we competed against Morris Catholic, and it really is the best dual meet to be at, because you've got both teams that have a foundation of that sportsmanship philosophy. And to see both teams going at it hardcore, really competitive, but at the same time, that super sportsmanship, making sure that they're saluting each other, checking on each other if there was an accidental contact, making sure everyone's having that good time. And I can tell you from experience, Mike's got a great program there and a great group of student athletes and decent human beings.
I love
And
the emphasis on the tradition and the integrity of the sport.
And also, too, that story actually has a lot more to it as well, because when I was beginning, basically my beginning for Morris Catholic, I showed up to an interview, and the principal of Morris Catholic at the time looked at me and said, "Oh, I see you fence. Would you mind doing a fencing team?" I hadn't even remembered my USFA training. And I looked at her and I said, "Is it going to get me the job?" And it took me a couple of years trying to learn anything I could, because historical fencing is so different from the other things. Like, to this day, I'm still working on trying to understand saber well.
That's wonderful. Honestly, you've learned some things, right, based off the season your girls' epee squad had this last year. I'd love to hear a bit about what went right for them, what clicked.
The 2024 season, we actually missed states by one victory,
Mm.
but I also had two very determined athletes who had been training for 2, 3 years and who had improved. We had spent the summer working out. They had been going to clubs, which we had recommended. And we ended up getting to our first state tournament team bid, and we ended up placing eighth. And our first match was against Randolph, who had beaten us earlier in the season. And it was something like 15-12, and they had beaten us. And we came back and hit them 14-4. And that came from the drive and the determination, and they really put the extra effort in.
You're talking about your women's team and each squad coming together and supporting each other and having that determination. Where do you think that really came from? Because it's one thing to have a team atmosphere, but you're talking about these student athletes that they had something in them that they wanted to show and prove. So where did that drive really come from?
One is I had two very competitive girls. They knew how to be on a team and work on a team. My top two saberists were very individual, but they started to realize the virtue of coming together as a squad and as a team and pushing each other.
I have a question for both of you gentlemen. You guys have both been in the sport a long time, and you've seen a lot of changes over the past few decades. I'd love to hear each of you share a little bit about how fencing has changed as you guys have seen it evolve. Mike, we'll start with you.
Individualism creeping in every year with, as our squads get a little bit more competitive, I'm seeing a lot of like ignoring the fact of what brought me to the sport. As I said, was honor, integrity. Like, whenever I see salutes today, they're kind of like, they don't even look at you, they just flick their blade at you. And I do see a lot of that happen, where the kid just disregards the other person as a fencer. And I've seen a lot of the throwing of masks and stuff like that. And I've had it on my team. Unfortunately, it's mainly kids who do have some discipline issues. But I will say one thing about it is that they learn with me. You have to be better than that.
This goes back to the building of the person that Lefty was referencing earlier. I'm sure that you're going to take this more of a technology perspective, but what have you seen change in the past years that you've been doing it?
I do agree with Mike. A lot of it is attitude from the competitors. The attitude's changed slightly to more individualized. It's about me. And I don't know, maybe that's just generational. We still have those team players, the ones that really help their teammates out, give each other lessons, really bring up the squad, because they do want to compete at a top level. They want not just themselves to place somewhere, but they also want their squad and their team to be at the top as well. Yeah, you're right. From a technology point of view, of course, I see a lot of changes being made, and I'm part of that change. Or at least I hope to continue being part of that change in a positive way, trying to bring a little bit more to the table, bring fencing into a little bit more of a technology age without taking away from what fencing is supposed to be, that sportsmanship, that sport of individual and team, but also giving spectators and coaches a little bit more information about what's going on throughout the event, and educating people and giving people a place to learn and to follow along like they would almost any other sport without as much confusion as possible. But one thing I have noticed over the course of the years, it's becoming a lot more spectator friendly, but also we're getting a lot more spectators. A lot of these different events, especially in high school, the postseason events, there's a lot more people in the stands than there used to be. And I don't know if that's because teams have gotten larger, or the fencing world itself, the community has grown and it's getting more popular. But at college events and even the high school events, there's a lot more spectators. We at Drew, we host the Santelli Citrullo tournament, which is the largest in the country for high school fencing, and probably even more. But the amount of setup that we have to go through, because we anticipate hundreds upon hundreds of not just coaches, but we're talking about hundreds of spectators that want to watch their kids fence and be there and support them. I love seeing that. Everyone's coming out. And so for me, that's what I've really seen, is a growth in support of the student athletes. Fencing becomes better known as spectators learn more about the sport and get a better understanding of what their child is doing and why it's important for them to compete at such a high level and how that competition works. I'm seeing a lot more support of the student athlete, and that is a huge bonus. And I hope that continues.
I've been a spectator at the Drew events, and as a guy in the stands, I can tell you guys do a great job.
One of the things that I really enjoy is the fact that for the long time, I used to joke that as the greatest thing about being a fencing coach is the fact that nobody understands fencing. I don't get the problems that other sports get with them yelling at the refs and stuff like that. And I actually have had that before. I have one story where I had a student whose son was fencing, and he had a referee who was a Olympic commentator, and the parents started going, "Come on, ref, you're not calling it fair. You're not calling it." And I pulled him aside and I said, "Look, you need to stop. You need to control yourself." And he's not calling for my kid. And I said, "Because your kid is losing. The kid is a much better fencer than your child, and everything's fine." And he goes, "I still think he's being unfair." And I said, and then I gave him the pedigree. I gave him who the guy was. And he was embarrassed and he sat down. And then 3 years later, his daughter was in the program as well. And they got to states and they're watching, and the freshman parent looked over to him and says, "How do you know what's going on?" And he goes, "I'll tell you what. When Coach Malecki and Coach Orban, when they cheer, I cheer. When they're angry, I let them take care of it." And the thing is, like nowadays, like we're seeing a lot of spectators coming in, and they are coming in with a little bit more knowledge. One of the things that I was doing at Morris Catholic for a while was I was handing out a small little brochure that would say, "This is what saber is, this is what foil is, this is what epee is," to give them a basics of what was going on, how it was going on, and so that people understood what was going on. But it's still tough, and I always wanted to was bring in the parents for one night and have them fence so that they understood where they were, where their kids were coming
I
from.
love that idea.
I've had issues where like I've had parents coaching from the sidelines, be more aggressive, do this. And like in a tournament, maybe I don't want that fencer attacking during a pool bout, because if she loses 5-1, we get 4 indicator points down. But if she loses 2-1, that's a whole lot better. And so my thing would be a little bit more defensive. Take your actions as they come. Not telling her to stop fencing, but to really take your time and push that. And when a parent's in the middle of the stand shouting out, "Come on, attack him!"
I've had this debate with my own son, who's a foil, and he'd be like, "Dad, it's not all about attack. You don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
Mark, you actually have 2 fencers in your family. You've got
Yeah.
a foil and a saber fencer.
That's why one of the things I actually have in my parent handbook, I have a thing which says, cheer positive, cheer neutral. And
That's a
it's,
good.
it's say, "Yes, good job, excellent job," things like that.
The connection of the athlete and the coach. You build that coach athlete relationship and you understand each other and you find ways to communicate. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially now being a college coach, is the fencers relying more on each other, their bouts. It's one thing for me to be a strip coach and give my insight and whatever, but they're also looking to their teammates for advice and assistance in certain moments, whether that person had just fenced them a couple bouts before and might have some extra knowledge, or just they have that person that they know they can go to and they can hear them. And that's the other thing too, is you learn about your fencers and what to say on the strip, what not to say on the strip. And that's an important part of building that team and building that squad atmosphere, is learning about your fencers. And I actually at Drew, we'll sit down early in the season in a circle with the whole squad and be like, okay, what works for you? What doesn't work for you? Who do you need to hear from on the strip? Because I have got a fencer who, when he's got 5 people yelling things at him, he's not hearing any of it. And he'll get frustrated on the strip. So I need one person, relay through that person, but I need one person, one voice. And who's that voice?
You both touched on an interesting point here about the relationship between the fencer and the coach. I really feel it's a little more personal in this sport. And I could be wrong, but I don't coach. But I feel like those bigger sports of the football and the baseball, it doesn't seem as intimate as the connection and relationship that you guys get to build with your fencers.
The football coaches, baseball coaches, the one thing about team sports is you're focused on the team and the building of the team. And say I got 35 kids on the team, I'm really only focused on the starters and maybe a couple of up and comers. And I have an entire team I've got to deal with. In fencing, though, every time the person's on the strip, they're individual.
Yes.
So we have to be there for them. But also, too, like as Lefty was pointing out, one of the things about that relationship is important. Like, for example, I have some kids who are better fencers than I have ever been and probably more advanced than my technique can assist them. But that changes my thought process. Instead of saying, bend your knees, throw your arm out, it's walking up to them and saying, okay, what's happening? Tell me what's happening really quickly. Sum it up in a sentence, and getting them to acknowledge what's going on and having them determine for themselves the best possible course of action. As Lefty said, I have some kids that I literally come up because I'm a very intense person. In fact, at Morris Catholic, you would see me whenever I start getting intense, the Epee squad throws a stuffed animal at me. And there's a My Little Pony Pinkie Pie doll that they carry with them. And whenever I would get a little out of course, we'd put it there. And there are some kids who just can't handle that intensity, and they'll be like, okay, coach, I don't want you in my corner in this match. I'm like, okay, no problem. Would you like another coach in your corner? Would you like a teammate?
I'd love to get a sense from you, Mike, about what's next for Morris Catholic, what's next for you personally. As you look into the future, what are you thinking?
Well, after 18 years, I've given up my position at Morris Catholic. I recently received a job offer from Gil St. And I'm in the starting process of trying to rebuild their team. Their team fell apart last year. They didn't have a season, and we're looking to rebuild their team up. I am holding to my same standards of Morris Catholic fencing that I did in the past.
You've instilled these philosophies and these ideas of sportsmanship and traditions, and they're not going to just fade as you leave. And you have put the effort in to make sure that Morris Catholic is left in good hands. You recognize the significance and importance of a team and a tradition. And for very cliche, this was your baby. You literally built this program. And I'm sure it's been hard saying goodbye.
You should have seen the meeting with the fencers. I could barely read off of my screen when I was trying to give my speech. And I looked up, and the 3 Sabres were holding hands during the entire speech together. And that just made me break down even more.
That's the legacy of you, Mike. That Morris Catholic's legacy starts with Mike Malecki. It may not end with Mike Malecki, but it starts there. And that is tradition and foundation that is now being held up by people you have taught and people you have instilled these solid, wonderful traditions with. And I hope that you get to compete against Morris Catholic and get that welcome from your former team, but that recognition of, that's my old coach. We're still going to kick his team's butt, but we're going to do it the way he taught us. And you get to see it from the other side. You get to see what you've built, what you've done over these 18 years has not been for nothing.
As we get ready to wrap up, I want to say thank you for all you've done for the fencing community, for sharing your journey, your philosophy. You've made quite an impact, not just on the sport, but on a lot of individual kids in their development. Lefty, you did a much better job than I will in the accolades, but it's clear that this isn't just a thing you do. You've been very instrumental in the development of how New Jersey fencing is developing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
We're grateful for all you bring the community. I wanted to tell the gang and anyone listening, if people want to learn more about Mike, we'll have some show notes. If you want to learn more about a TBT and what the app does, we'll also be in the show notes. So you can head over to tbtfencing.com. Thank you for your time, Mike. This has been the Beyond the Bout podcast, and we will see you next time.